Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have so many on the call this morning as we have a virtual walk around the parish of Elkstone. And just as a reminder, as you can see from this first slide, there's a little booklet available either from the website or can be picked up in any of the parish churches. It describes 9 of the circular routes and one long route right down the centre of the Churn Valley. The proceeds from the booklet go straight into the parish church or the benefice account, depending on how you pay for it. The access to Elkstone comes from Cowley, actually, and the solid red line you can see there is what I've called the Churn Valley Way, although it's not been officially adopted yet. And going off that, there's a dotted red line you can see, which is the Cowley Circular Walk, and we're going to be describing that in a couple of weeks' time. Just following that route from Cowley takes you through the Cowley Woods and into Elkstone. So the first few slides I'm going to be showing are that route that gets you up to Elkstone. And there's a dotted red line you can see now striking off and going up through Cowley Woods, where there's a fire break. Quite a steep ascent, as you'll see in a moment. Starting from the little lane that goes from Cowley up to the A417, it's a roundabout on the way to Brimsfield. There's a footpath sign, climb over the stile and come to a pond. Left at that pond would take you down to the Green Dragon Inn, but straight on there's a climb up the hill, and on the way you can see a shooter's lookout post there, accessed by a little ladder, and our grandson enjoyed climbing up there last time he was with us. The view out from the top of the fire break is quite impressive. Looking back there to Cowley Manor, you can just see tucked away there in the trees. And then the footpath goes across this field, coming from the right there. So if you go straight across that junction, follow the road for about another quarter of a mile, past the bus shelter, and there is a scheduled bus service here, but I've never seen a bus. That's quite a rare event, I think. So here's the Crossroads. To the left is the road coming up from the Green Dragon and Bubbs Hill. Straight on would take you down into the heart of the village, but turn right here and follow the road down. And probably one of the first impressive buildings you come to is the old rectory, and those Victorian clergy really knew how to live, didn't they? There was one of these sort of buildings in each of the 4 churches that I'm most involved with. And now we're down to just one rectory in Cowley. Anyway, an aerial view of Elkstone shows the position of the church at the head of a shallow valley, a very attractive valley. And Elkstone village itself is at an altitude of over 820 feet. So it's one of the highest villages in the Cotswolds and was listed in the Domesday Book of 1086. According to the website British History Online, from 1623 to 1858, the lords of the manor at Elkstone were the Craven family, who happened to originate from Skipton in North Yorkshire, which is my hometown by complete coincidence. Back in 1943, the author R.P. Beckinsale rather harshly described Elkstone as a bleak, lonely hamlet at the head of a small coombe, which plunges down to the Churn. Well, how things have changed. The old barns have been converted into smart homes, and there's a thriving community centred around the village hall and the parish church. I think we caught it on a very nice day when the flowers were in bloom. And one of the first treats I had on coming to live around here about 6 years ago was when David and Sylvie took me up the top of the tower. David, as you know, sadly passed away 2 or 3 years ago, but he was a real giant of a figure in Elkstone in terms of not only his physical stature, but all the work he did for 25 years as treasurer and church warden. Just looking out to the east, a view across the fields, and that's where our route lies, basically, down that shallow valley. This is a view of the church from the east end, quite a magnificent building, and one that's been recognised in several books. David Veary and Alan Brooks, there's Simon Jenkins and Christopher Wynne have all spoken well of Elkstone. And Kitty Morgan, who lives in Florida and is a regular visitor to the Cotswolds, has made a very nice video with beautiful classical music showing the different features of the church. Here's Sylvie pointing out the entrance carving of Christ in glory, but somebody smashed his face in. I wouldn't like to be that person giving an account to the Almighty in a few years' time. And you've got the symbols for the 4 writers of the Gospels, amongst many other interesting things. Here we have an evening meeting, and I think this was when the Reverend Jeff Cox and his wife were celebrating an anniversary. Sadly, his wife passed away quite recently. Elkstone's got some magnificent stained glass windows. The one on the left there is St. John the Evangelist, to whom the church is dedicated. I'm sure you recognise the one in the middle with Mary holding the Christ child. And then my favourite personally is over on the right there with Mary Magdalene recognising the gardener as Christ, the risen Lord. A friend of mine, Pete Ryder, was visiting a few years ago. He's a medieval archaeologist and he specialises in cross-slab grave covers. He was very excited to find a fine example of this in the vestry and has written about it. Elkstone Parish Church is famous for the architecture, really, the wonderful Norman arches and the honeycomb limestone. Around Christmas time each year, there are Holy Communion services, and Carol Burry, the local artist and committed member of the church, has done some artwork for us on the cover, which is pretty amazing. I always look at that and find it quite inspiring, that picture. And a couple of years ago, Chloe Darling, who was the church warden at the time, arranged for a animals nativity. I think the animals were quite well behaved and a jolly good time was had by all. It somehow brings to life the nitty-gritty nature of Christmas, that the Son of God would choose to be born in such a lowly situation. Here's a few PCC members out for a walk. In fact, it was a prayer walk around the village on the way to Palm Sunday later in the year. The church is always beautifully decorated, this time for harvest, although in 2020 we struggled really to meet in church at all because of the COVID-19 risk. Just by the way, there is another village, probably 150 miles to the north, in the Peak District. And there are 2 villages there. So there's Upper and Lower Elkstone. About 18 months ago, I was checking out the Elkstones on my way to go on a caving trip in the Manifold Valley, and a lady was having a cup of tea in the garden, and I asked for directions to the church, and she helped me out. And then we were invited back to their flower festival. So as you can see there's Steve and Jill, the locals, Margaret, Sylvie, Ronnie and myself. We had a very nice day with them in the Elkstones, and we're really impressed with the quality of their community and the way that the church had been decorated. They have actually written 2 books on the history of the Elkstones, and they've got a very active community which has recorded a lot of the history in that village. So glad to have cordial relations with the twin village in the Peak District. Closer to home, here we have Jeff doing the toy service, as it's called. It's an annual event, and it just struck me the other day as I saw this structure which he'd made. the similarities with our composting toilet, which Chloe and David and several others, Brian, were very committed to. It was about £20,000 to construct this out of seasoned oak timbers, and it's got a design life of 200 years. So the facility has meant that we've been able to have quite a bit of recognition for Elkstone Parish Church. Here's Carol and Sam Cavender from the diocese with his camera. Chloe, who sadly left us shortly afterwards and emigrated to Slovenia. Here's a goodbye party for Chloe. And there's Jeff, our current church warden, over on the right, presenting her with a bag of goodies. Having a composting toilet or an eco-loo has meant that we were able to use the church for concerts and art exhibitions and all sorts of other community events, although there is a thriving village hall as well. But the acoustics in Elkstone Parish Church are very special. At around the same time, we had the vision for a wildflower meadow, and Chloe got hold of a special bale of hay from Prince Charles's Duchy farm, and we were able to strew the hay across the ground, which had been raked over and prepared. Nothing much happened the first year, but this last 2 or 3 years, the wildflowers have really been shooting up, and there's been a great abundance of them. We have a little PowerPoint slide on the website for those who want to know more about this. And Brian Howlett's our expert on these matters. Jeff was able to help the children to build a bug house. Well, in fact, more than one, although I don't think it's been very well populated this last year. Another project that's been happening in the church is the refurbishment of the bell fittings. And here we have Simon Ridley in the middle there, concentrating up in the bell tower. And he kindly became project manager for our refurbishment of the bells. And as part of that project, for fundraising, he got this rig for us during the Elkstone annual Open Gardens event. I'm just going to try and play this. I hope it works. The bells were removed for several months to be trimmed and tuned so that when they were replaced just a few weeks ago, they would sound better than they ever have done. And they have been in place there, some of them for several hundred years. Sylvie there with the biggest bell, she was a major sponsor, and various other folk. The bells each had to be hoisted up through this hole in the ceiling. And then a week or two later, we had a special dedication service, and Robert Springett, who's been a great friend to Elkstone for many years, came in his role as Bishop of Tewkesbury to perform the dedication service. The COVID-19 pandemic has meant that we've had to wear face masks inside the church and various other restrictions, but the rules did allow us to meet outdoors, provided we stayed in our family groupings. And here's an outdoor service that we held during the summer. On another occasion, for Rogation, we met in a neighbour's garden. And here we're giving thanks for the blessing of water. And this particular well shaft was of great interest to me as a potholer. I was very pleased that Anne and Jeremy gave me permission to go down this hole. And one of my friends who's in the cave rescue team came and supported me on the descent. Here we are, just about to go down into the abyss and find out what's, if anything's at the bottom. It was about 30 feet deep, and the stone lining was in excellent condition as far as I could tell. And then I landed in chest deep water. But very interestingly, just before I went into the water to explore what was beneath, I took this picture. There's an image of everyone looking down from above. It's a reflection. Yeah, I thought that was quite special, an unexpected effect. By the way, the water, as I say, was about chest deep. I couldn't find anything of great interest. I was hoping to retrieve some things of interest, but no such luck on that occasion anyway. Right, well, after all that preparation, we're now about to start the walk. And as you can see, it goes in a circular route, initially through the village, across the fields to Sparrowthorn, then down towards Painter's Cottage, Coombe End Manor, and then back into the village again. So here we go. Just to give you a few facts and figures, it's only about 2 miles long, but there's an option of extending the walk down into Colesbourne, and I'll say a little bit about that at the end. Here's a picture that we found had been donated to the church. There's various postcards in the entrance area. I think this is called the Pound, and picture must have been taken, I don't know, back in the 1940s. I'm only guessing here. But you come out of the church, down a little path, which you can see on the right there, gets you onto the back lane, and then along a little lane which is covered in trees and undergrowth. It's a bit like being in a scene from Lord of the Rings, but eventually you merge after about a quarter of a mile, a pathway going off to the right. And here I've taken the liberty of showing one of Carol's sketches. Looks to have been inspired by winter conditions. And here's another one with a track going off, a restricted byway actually going off across the fields. There's a view looking back to Elkstone. You can see it's quite a good track. I dare say you could drive a car across it, although I've not tried that yet. Going along the track, I was very interested to see various prints of animals in the mud. And this one, which looks like a perfectly formed arrow, got me looking back at a book I had when I was leading the Cub Scouts many years ago, and discovered that it was actually a footprint from a pheasant. It's pointing backwards, the arrow's pointing backwards, but it shows that the birds come from that direction. And now coming to the end of that track, you see the barn there over on the right, Sparrowthorn. Come down the track from the right onto a metal road. Oh, there's Sparrowthorn. And we're now about to head down into the valley towards Painter's Cottage. So 100 yards or so along the road, heading towards Colesbourne. And there's a sign there for a footpath going down steeply to start with into some more woodland. And this is quite a special place. Here's Carol, Ronnie, and Margaret. It's got a different atmosphere depending on how much foliage is around. Beyond the wood, the footpath opens out into a secluded valley. Very nice shape. And towards the bottom of the valley, it meets a metal road again. Various signs here for routes to follow, and there's one called Olive's Walk. I've not been able to find the full description of Olive's Walk, but I'm pretty sure it's on a website run by Tewkesbury Ramblers Group. So the walk goes up the hill to the left. And there's one of the entrances to Coombe End, which is a big estate house. There we are. Coombe End is shown in the circle and it's built on the site of a Roman villa. Although I don't suppose the owners would like to have people wandering around with metal detectors and things, but we know there's other Roman villas in the area with mosaic floors. The next feature is the upper entrance into Coombe End, and just beyond there, the footpath strikes off across the field. It's not very obvious, is it? But if you look really carefully, you can see a faint track and it goes across to a line of telegraph poles. So hopefully, if you do this walk, you'll see the telegraph pole and head towards it. Even though the footpath doesn't look very distinct at all, there is a public right of access. And soon after reaching the telegraph pole, you're back into another one of these lovely valleys. Path goes steeply down into the valley bottom. There's a tree which we call Janet's tree, after Revd Arthur Janet Williams, who was in the village for quite a long time and is now Vice Principal of a theological college in the north. The track continues around this sharp bend, and there's Anne walking a dog, Anne and Carol having a chat. And we come then to the edge of Elkstone village again. A rather beautiful pond. We were there in March as the daffodils were at the best. Joyce Haslam, who lived in the village for many years, was quite an accomplished watercolour artist, and she drew inspiration from this place, and several of her paintings have recently been auctioned off. Sadly, Joyce died earlier this year. And here we are back in Elkstone Parish Church in the grounds, and that would conclude a normal circuit of Elkstone Parish. However, I just want to quickly take you down towards Colesbourne, and the route goes off from Sparrowthorne. And you may remember last time we went off to the right at this point. Instead of going right, you turn left through that gate and head sort of diagonally across the fields in the general direction of Colesbourne. And fairly soon there's a proper distinct path. Oh, by the way, there are a few pigs to admire just at the side of the road there. And I was up there a couple of weeks ago and noticed a bench seat which is hidden from view. But again, there's a reference to Tewkesbury Walking Club. Quite nice views back towards Upper Cobberley in the distance. And there's a badger set on the way down through a narrow footpath just before getting into Colesbourne. So there we are. That's all the routes really, coming up from Cowley initially, quite a bit of talking about the parish church, then the circular route, and now the final link down into Colesbourne, back onto the Churn Valley Way. And this is the important landmark on the way, the first of the houses in Colesbourne, and then the road is continuing straight ahead.